thank you all for joining us, watching. It's hard not to see an audience, but I
Yeah.
see you guys are asking questions in the Q&A. And please send any questions there. I'm going to grab a few from here. Okay, this comes from David Y to David B. I loved your show with Frank Skinner back in the day, and he says, my question is about Spurs and the Y word. I
Right.
personally like it and believe its usage to be the opposite of racism and in fact brings fans together. By reclaiming it, we take away its power to offend. But further, by Spurs fans proudly wearing the badge of Yin Army, Jew and Gentile alike, it shows solidarity along these lines. Could you accept that there might be a positive to this, or will it always be a negative?
Well, I've done a whole separate load of things about the Y word, and I don't know how much we want to talk about it now, but I mean, my basic position has always been, okay, so the point is, if it's a reclamation of a hate word, and it is a hate word, it was scrawled across the East End of London by Oswald Mosley's black shirt, then it would be the first time in history that a hate word had been reclaimed not by the minority in question, because most Spurs fans are not Jewish. The identity of Spurs fans as Jews is essentially a racist thing that other clubs sort of posted, as it were, on Spurs, because Spurs is in a Jewish area of London. So it started becoming the Jewish club, and anti-Semitism happened, and blah, blah, blah. Now, yes, I understand that Spurs fans themselves, in embracing that identity, felt at the time that happened like, okay, well, yeah, that's fine. We're going to call ourselves the Yids, and that's sort of like great, and blah, blah, blah. But it's still 95% of people in Spurs Stadium at any one time will be not Jewish, which, as I've said elsewhere, is like, if you took a black area of London and the same thing had happened, and the mainly white crowd, in solidarity with their black fans, had started to call themselves the N-word army and chanting the N-word positively, well, that just wouldn't have worked, would it? That club would have been shut down very quickly in a modern era. And so that's the problem. And the other problem is, which is totally the other thing, is I did that Y-word thing because there was a Chelsea fan, and Chelsea are an opposing club, who, having identified, as these clubs do, Spurs as the Y-word club, just started chanting, fuck the Yids, fuck the Jews, at me and my brother when we were at Chelsea. And here's the point again, you always have to hear the silence. This is at a time when any racist abuse in a football stadium, you're banned for life. It says that in the programme, and no one did anything. No stewards did anything, no one did anything. And coming back to that thing about what do I hope for? Well, I hope for some understanding. I made a film that said, are we aware that this is happening, and are we not doing anything about it?
Just looking, there's a ton of questions coming in. I think this is an interesting one from Peter. Is a lot of anti-Semitism, he asked, just based on envy?
Well, that's a very simplistic but not an incorrect word for it, I think, because we've talked about this already, that this high-low status thing and this notion, which, by the way, the book is about progressives, okay, but it also, I think, underneath it has this drumbeat of still remaining far-right anti-Semitism, not just remaining, but growing, and I see it very much in the Charlottesville people chanting the Jews will not replace us and whatever. And so kind of my point is, all the left who are sort of failing to really be concerned about this, be concerned about it, because this thing still exists. And one of the things that still totally exists is the idea that Jews are in control and that Jews have money and whatever. And I mean, that is also held, I think, by some people basically on the left, but let's say that's traditional far-right anti-Semitism, and it plays in to the neglect, because if the neglect is, well, Jews are basically economically secure, Jews are basically in power and privilege and all the rest of it, and so we don't have to worry about them. Yeah, that is envy is one word for it. So I was talking actually 2 days ago to a brilliant rabbi called Delphine Orviller. She's French, an academic rabbi.
Yeah,
and she's written an amazing book which basically does the same kind of things as the book that you've written and the book that I've written, but does it from the point of view of the rabbis were talking about this in 1200 or whatever. And she suggests, which I think is probably true, that even though this must be very buried in people's mind, the idea of the Jews as the chosen people is something that also inspires envy. Not that I think any Jew ever feels actually chosen by God, ever. I'm an atheist, so I guess...
chosen for good or ill, we don't really know.
Yeah, like in what way were we chosen and how has it helped? But yeah, I think that creates envy as well.
this is a sweet question. How do you not go crazy from all of this? This is Anonymous asks. Not just the shameless hatred and double standards that so many people feel toward us, but the gaslighting and the insistence that it's in our head. Do you meditate? Please share your secrets.
No, I don't do any of that. I mean, I'm very so the thing about the Jewish reserve that I talked about with Britishness, I've never really had that. I've always been unbelievably out about being Jewish. I mean, I wouldn't be like, I don't have shame anyway, like as a gene, I don't have it. And so I would never have shame about being Jewish. So I was always incredibly out about being Jewish anyway. And so when I saw anti-Semitism start to become, you know, intensified in this country, my first reaction to that was just to talk about it and to speak about it and whatever. And I mean, sometimes I do. I mean, I did like that thing I said earlier about the young Jewish female comedian saying how she wanted to sort of hide her own trauma from this gay guy who was saying, you don't know what it's like. I did get angry. I did, not towards her, but towards him, even though he wasn't there, just saying, you should have said, fuck you. And that does happen to me. I do feel, but it's the same thing, which is I don't feel any restriction on me for speaking out about this. And I guess that's the answer. I don't meditate, but I speak immediately. You know, that's my release, is immediately saying stuff about it. And for better or worse, and social media is unbelievably poisonous and dangerous or whatever, but it does give me that outlet, is I sort of say stuff immediately when I see it.
In a weird way, and go with me on this, I think that that's a nice opening for us to touch on the Israel question, because one of the first things I noticed about you, I dated someone who was a huge fan of yours, and I noticed that your bio on Twitter just said Jew.
Yeah.
And I loved it. And I was like, I should imitate that. But, you know, I just thought it was so cool. And one thing that I feel very strongly about is that I think one of the reasons that people like us are able to be so unashamed, and I would even say, in my case, you know, very, very loud and proud as a Jew, as I see that you are, David, is the existence of the state of Israel, which is to say, in a weird way, love Bibi, hate Bibi, criticize the rabbinate, whatever. It's not about Israeli policy. The existence of that safe haven makes life in London or Los Angeles or on the Upper West Side possible for Jews in a way that it wasn't before Israel's existence. I'm wondering if you've thought about that, because one thing that is notable in the book and notable about your social media presence is that when Israel comes up, you kind of have this trope of saying, you know, fuck off about Israel, essentially.
Yeah,
and I understand strategically why you're doing it. You're saying, like, this is a distraction. Don't drag me into this. Don't make this about a Middle Eastern country that you, critic, probably can't even locate on the map.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you could comment on that, and if you identify as a Zionist or not. And
well, I say in the book that I'm a non-Zionist, because I'm not going to say I'm an anti-Zionist and I'm not pro-Zionist. I mean, I do. So in terms of that tactic, so because I am, it's a true thing about me. I have no capacity to lie. I mean, sort of, it's sort of slightly on the spectrum. I don't have a capacity to lie. So this is true what I'm saying about myself in terms of Israel. It is also a tactic. So you have to hold the cognitive distance. So when I say it's a tactic, I don't mean, oh, I don't really mean that. And I don't want anti-Semites to think, oh, he's just lying. But it is a tactic. And the tactic is that, so people get very upset sometimes when I talk about Israel. And in fact, you said fuck Israel. I also said, I use the phrase stupid fucking Israel quite a lot on my Twitter feed, by which I really mean not the country particularly. I mean the idiotic conversation that you have to have the minute that you talk about anything Jewish, like the minute you mention Jewishness or even don't mention Jewishness. I mean, I have this thing whereby I can talk about anything on my Twitter feed and someone will say, what about Palestine, right? And that thing, that's what I mean by stupid fucking Israel, really. But I also think that my non-Zionism, and this is the tactical part of it, does allow me to say things about anti-Semitism, and it's hard for the idiots and the bad faith people and the anti-Semites to say you're just a Zionist shill. You're basically someone who supports Israel, and you're only saying this, you're only smearing Corbyn as an anti-Semite or whatever else it might be, because you're basically trying to promote Israel or whatever. And then I could just point them to, well, it's a bit odd, this tweet where I've said stupid fucking Israel again, isn't it? Because of that. And so it's helpful that, and Jews get upset about it. I sometimes want to say to them, it's not for you. It's for the anti-Zionists, this thing, because they want so much all Jews to be secretly talking about Israel. And that, I find that just useful from that point of view. Having said that, I don't feel it like you feel it. I don't feel a deep emotional connection to that country. And I went to Hubonim, which is a Jewish Zionist organization, and I'm going to say, indoctrinated to love it. But I don't. I just think, and I think, as I say in the book, that the idea that I should have a very strong position either way is kind of weird, and I think racist, because I think, that is not what most Muslims feel about any Muslim country. I know that there are loads of Muslim countries and only one Jewish country, but I just don't feel it. I do, if you really push me on it. So as an atheist, I'm not sure about the idea of religion, which at the end of the day, we are talking about slightly more than ethnicity, I think, in terms of Israel, as the basis for statehood in general. So from that point of view, when people say, anyone who says the state of Israel has no right to exist is obviously a very deep anti-Semite. Most of the time they are. But I think you could be coming from an intellectual position where you just say, I am a deep secularist. I don't believe that religion should be anywhere near a national flag. I kind of think, well, that's an intellectual position and, reasonable enough, I think. So I just don't have it. And tell you what I don't have as well, by the way, is I don't have that safe haven thing. I just don't. I mean, and remember, my mum was born in Nazi Germany, right?
I am conscious.
No, but I am very close to actual, like my mum was really nearly killed, and I saw the damage. She's not with us anymore, but I saw the damage in her every day. And nonetheless, I just don't have a sense that, oh, if it gets that bad, at least there's this country. My mind never goes there for whatever reason. And I actually, because I don't really, Britain is not going to become like that, even if Jeremy Corbyn had got him, right? And Jeremy Corbyn was not Hitler. I mean, I know a lot of Jews thought he was. He really wasn't. He had, as I try and outline in the book, a very complicated relationship to this subject. Hitler did not have a complicated relationship to this subject, just wanted to kill us, right? And so I just, in my lifetime and in my children's lifetime, I am absolutely certain that Britain will not become an anti-Semitic, destroying, psychotic, genocidal state. And therefore, I don't have that sense of Israel. It's there if I need it.
Yeah, I don't. I'll say one more thing. I don't think that what anyone thinks is at risk in your country is it becoming genocidal in the Nazi sense. I think the fear is that we would become more anti-Semitic in the Soviet sense. In other words, not, a bullet to the head kind of anti-Semitism, but frog in boiling water type of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism that makes Jews, maybe like the comedians you spoke to, feel the necessity to be closeted in their most basic identity in order to thrive, in order to kind of have the lives that they want to live. I think that's really what's at stake.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but I don't think it leads me to think, oh, well, then I will be running away to Israel. What I will be doing is speaking out more about anti-Semitism in this country and in America and in Europe. I mean, I agree that it's intensifying and the frog in boiling water is correct. And that is a lot to do with the way progressives ignore it and neglect it and don't put it on the agenda for the wider understanding of where we are now. But yeah, I can't, the idea of the safe haven just doesn't, it's just not in me like it's in loads of people, really. And I think the non-Zionism, I really like the non-Zionism as a way of describing it, because I just do feel the incumbency, the sort of racist incumbency as a Jew, that you must have a very strong position on Israel emotionally, either negatively or positively. I just don't. And I don't know why I have to.
Mm-hmm. There's a ton of questions here. What advice, David, would you give to Jewish students? Susan is speaking about Tufts University, but we could talk about Bristol or any of these schools, yeah, where Students for Justice in Palestine or any number of other groups have such a strong grip on the culture of campus. What do you advise to those 19, 20-year-olds?
Well, I think again, it's the specifics are different in each case. I don't know about that one.
Well, Bristol we know about.
Bristol I have spoken about quite a lot. And that's kind of an interesting example, by the way, in that I do tend not to get involved in shouting matches about Israel. But for me, so here's my own personal definition of what the difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, which obviously blurs in all sorts of ways. And my position is that you can say the state of Israel shouldn't have been created and possibly not be an anti-Semite, as I say, if you come from a deeply secularist position or whatever else it might be. I'm not saying that it probably is anti-Semitic, but here's the thing. Here's how you know it's anti-Semitic, because it always comes with anti-Semitic tropes. Those anti-Semitic tropes being the state of Israel shouldn't exist, and it only exists because of a global lobby secretly controlling everything, with its fingers in everything, even Jewish student societies. Look, this is where Mossad is secretly, they are pawns of the, that's when it's clearly anti-Semitic, because the notion of Jewish control of everything is deeply anti-Semitic, right? So I know that David Miller is operating from those tropes and those positions, and I don't care that in his mind he thinks I'm just opposing Israel. So
Right.
what I think you can do, and I don't know how much helpful it is point out to the fucking authorities how anti-Semitic that is, right? Because they will say, and they kind of have said, oh, this is just a difference of political opinion about Israel. No, it isn't, right? Because see the tropes. And we live in a time when see the tropes, right, about lots of other minorities is a real proper argument. You know, this is a known microaggression against black people. This is a known aggression against gay people, a known trope, blah, blah, blah. You see that all the time, okay? So that is where it's useful, I think, to apply some of the weapons of identity politics to the experience of Jews.
There's a few questions that are very sweet about you being a dad and
Okay.
how you educate your children about all of this, and also what traditions, given that you are an atheist, what traditions and aspects of your Jewishness do you focus on in passing on to your children so that they remain strongly Jewish? People
Well,
want your parenting advice, David.
oh yeah, well, both of them identify as Jews, even though my wife is a Catholic atheist. But they do identify as Jews. That might just be because I shout more loudly in the house about Jewishness than she does about Catholicness, given that we're both atheists. It may also be because, you know, even they have a sense of, like kids do now, they want an identity, and, you know, that it is an identity for them. But also, you know, I am an atheist, okay, but I'm going to call myself a celebrity atheist just for a minute. I know that's a bit wanky, but I need to say it for this phrase, right? All the celebrity atheists I know, Richard Dawkins and Ricky Gervais and all those kind of people, they don't come from an ethnic minority, right? So they have a notion of atheism that is slightly different from mine. So I deeply, deeply, deeply believe that God does not exist. However, I do think that religion has great cultural value in some respects. And certainly I think you can't understand what it means to be human unless you give religion time and space and understand what it does for people. And for me, you know, I grew up with, you know, went to a very Orthodox Jewish primary school. I did Pesach and Hanukkah and Rosh Hashanah and all that stuff when I was young. I learnt Hebrew, whatever, and I went to Habonim, all that stuff. I mean, but all with all the caveats that happen with being a secular Jew. So I was eating bacon at home because my dad loved bacon and whatever, and he's an atheist. And my mum was from this Holocaust family, but, you know, they're Reformed Jews and they were always arguing about blah. So, you know, it's all really mixed up, which landed me when I became sort of intellectually of age, atheist. I'm an atheist, but I still do stuff. We still light candles on Hanukkah. We sing Moatzor. We do a Seder. It's not a religious Seder. It's a funny Seder, mainly. It's mainly comedy, but undeniably, it's part of who I am and the tradition and the identity and whatever. And I want my children to know about it and feel some connection to it. Yes.
Um, a lot of questions touch on this expression BAME, which I learned from your book, which is, I guess, an acronym that's like our version of BIPOC.
Yeah.
People are wondering your thoughts on what happened on the BBC News with the debate around whether or not Jews are. And yeah, if Jews were explicitly included in BAME, would that make a difference to the perception of Jews as a minority deserving of protection? I'm
Yeah.
putting together a few questions in that.
Okay, so in the book I talk about this, and it may be specific to that acronym because it's Black, Asian, and minority ethnic. And because the book is very much about saying we have to recognize that Jews are an ethnic minority, I ask the question, why are they not included in BAME? And I demonstrate various things that happen all the time, which is people saying X or Y is the first BAME Chancellor of the Exchequer, ignoring the fact there's been a Jewish Chancellor of the Exchequer, you know, 10 years ago or whatever. Right. What happened with that particular thing was to do with the book. I don't know if people would know the backstory of it, but so a guy called Anwar Sawar was announced as the first minority ethnic. It wasn't actually BAME. It was announced as the first ethnic minority leader of a UK political party when he became head of the Scottish Labour Party. And the Labour Party made that announcement. And I was suddenly overwhelmed with people saying to me, Jews and non-Jews, oh, Jews don't count, because the book had just come out or whatever, because Ed Miliband is Jewish and he was head of the, but also Disraeli was Jewish and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And so eventually I said something about it. And then the BBC got in touch and said, we want to talk about this on this show, Politics Live. And I said, no. And the reason I said no is that the book is a short book, but it's complex and nuanced, and it says very difficult to explain at times things about Jewish identity. I didn't want to do 7 minutes on the BBC, mainly about Anwar Sarwar being announced as this. And also, I didn't want to take away from his achievement. It is an achievement that a person of color, of course, is the head of a UK political party. And that thing of like, which is complicated. Sometimes, when you try and say, what about Jews, you get accused of throwing other minorities under the bus and whatever. I didn't want any of that. So instead of saying, okay, we won't do it, they basically did it anyway. They got this guy, Ben Cohen, who is a very nice guy who runs Pink News, but I don't think he knew what they were going to do. And what they did was they wrote underneath him, like on a banner on TV, should Jews count as an ethnic minority? ? And that, but what that is a mangled misunderstanding of my book. The fact they use the word count is definitely to do with my book. And I had the person who hosts that show, who is Jewish, writing to me and saying, why are people slagging us off on Twitter? We're just trying to say the same thing as your book. I said, no, you're not. Because it's clear from my book, the title, to return to that, is I am aping in my book an attitude that needs taking apart, a progressive attitude that needs taking apart, that Jews don't really count. It's clear, right? It's not clear from should Jews count as an ethnic minority ? Right? And here's one Jewish person and 4 non-Jews to discuss that. It sounds like completely the optics are, we think it's in play, who knows, right? And that's
totally.
That's all wrong.
It was hilarious. I mean, everyone here was talking about it. Just because I see we're getting close to time, Rachel asks, I keep seeing more people in public life, singers, comedians, actors, I mean, it's like everyone, who I loved and now turn out to be Jew haters. It's getting me down. David, do you have any advice?
Not really. I mean, when that happens, it is really depressing.
Though, there's a deep question going on, I would say, over the past few years, really intensely, about, can you love art of someone that has done something bad?
Yeah, well, I talked about this yesterday on Twitter with, because there was Rafe Fiennes was on the Today program talking about his production of The Four Quartets, which is a T.S. Eliot poem. And T.S. Eliot was a vicious anti-Semite, and I talk about that in the book. And again, I try and make it clear that I definitely do not want Rafe Fiennes' production of The Four Quartets to be cancelled. What I want is for on the Today program, when just as they would for any other historic racism great artist, say, what about this? Well, how do you feel about that? And find a way of talking about it. But it's not mentioned. And it's so, I mean, it's very extreme, T.S. Eliot's anti-Semitism. It's not light, and it's really extreme. And of course, he was best mates with Ezra Pound, who was a total Nazi, right? And so, but I think that both those men, particularly Eliot, but even Ezra Pound, were great poets, and I do think, Roald Dahl being another example, and I write children's books. I actually won, right, for my first children's books, an award that used to be called the Roald Dahl Award. And I did think, maybe I can't accept this. And then they changed the name to the Laugh Out Loud Award, which made it sound much naffer, but at least meant that I was able to accept it without having to worry about it. But Roald Dahl is a great, great writer of children's stories and an anti-Semite. And in terms of the questioner, it does spoil stuff a bit, but it doesn't mean that you can't still recognize that it's great art.
It's just interesting given, the viciousness of, well, anyway, we could go on about Dr. Seuss. I want to end with this nice comment from Tina Lazarus. She says, David, you're brilliant. I'm tired of having to explain exactly what you're saying to people who are so shocked when I pull them up on their anti-Semitic comments. The latest one was a week ago when I was told I'd be great in banking because Jews are good with money. Now I can happily send them or direct them to your book. So it was a pleasure talking to David Baddiel. Thank you all for joining us. The book is Jews Don't Count. It fits right in your pocket, even in women's pants. And I highly recommend it.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you. It's really a pleasure to talk to you as well. Really
Take care,
enjoyed.
everybody.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for watching. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.